Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another inspiring and exciting episode of the Inspired Life Vancouver. I'm your host, Zara Durrani. It's been such an honor and pleasure to bring you amazing locals who are making a positive impact in our community. Joining me today is someone whose mission and purpose is to help as many people as possible. She is a psychotherapist, or in BC known as a registered clinical counselor. She is the founder of An Elegant Mind, and I'm talking about none other than Angela Leong, who has been helping people for the last 10 years improve their relationships with themselves, with their partner, and their life overall. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today.
What a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining today. It's so exciting to have you here. I kept running into Angela in the neighborhood, and I was like, I need to bring you on the show. We started our show, Inspired Life Vancouver. Our very first guest was a matchmaker. And I'm not a therapist. I used to teach yoga. I'm very fascinated with the mind, with the inner workings of the mind, how we attract people into our lives. You went to school for this.
I did.
You have been helping couples, people, individuals from all walks of life, sexualities, different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, improve their relationships.
Correct.
Tell me about your work.
That's a great question.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. I mean, I work with individuals. I work with couples. I work with all sorts of relationship configurations. I've had mother-daughters come into the practice, siblings, adolescents and their parents and so on. So, and people from all walks of life looking to resolve their relationship problems. And I definitely see everything under the sun, all sorts of relationship problems, you name it, right? Especially when it comes to trauma, intimate relating, intimate connection, and communication strategies for staying together as a couple, you name it. There's a wide umbrella of services that I provide.
I'm so curious, what inspired you to choose this path?
Yeah, I love answering this question. I knew I wanted to become a therapist when I was 17 years old. I remember taking advanced placement psychology when I was in high school, and I remember just really getting it. Like, it was one of those courses that I excelled in. I probably got like 98% in that course, and I just wasn't as interested in my other coursework. So naturally, this is something that I wanted to major in university. I remember my high school teacher saying to me that, like, it's quite unlikely that you're going to become a therapist. But I remember saying to myself, no, she's wrong. I'm going to become a therapist. And I said that to myself, and I made that happen. I went to do my master's degree at UBC as well, University of British Columbia. So I got my master's in counseling psychology. And even in graduate school, I knew I wanted to have a private practice. I just wanted the freedom of running my own business. And that's what I did as soon as I graduated.
That must be so fulfilling to know that you're helping people overcome inner blocks and barriers, and really, because I've been seeing a therapist for the last several years, like since COVID, and before I had a counselor who was also a life coach and a hypnotherapist that I work with. And it's so interesting that now people are really openly talking about, even on their dating profiles or when you meet someone, men, we've had so many men on the show sit here and talk about having a therapist. I'm so glad that this is now becoming normal. And before, I feel like I just wouldn't share, yes, I go see a counselor. I would just say a life coach. I'm so glad that we're having these discussions around mental health and self-care. Have you seen that change in your in your work?
Yeah, I'm definitely. I think because of social media, because of TikTok, a lot of people are getting their pop psychology knowledge through these platforms, and they're coming in through my office already understanding the attachment theory language, right? Already having a sense of what their attachment style might be, and already having a sense of what anxiety is, what depression is. Whereas I think 10, 15 years ago, people wouldn't really understand what it means to be anxious or depressed. They would just say that, like, I'm not, I don't want to live anymore, for example, right? Or they go see their family doctor. It was definitely less commonplace to think that you can talk to a therapist and start to feel better. But I'm really glad, like, even, as I was saying to you earlier, like, there's lots of lay people, a lot of people that I know in my community at least, who are very skilled, right? They're skilled listeners, they're skilled space holders, and they've learned this stuff through workshops and through their own self-development. So we're definitely working with the higher echelon of clientele these days as psychotherapists. So it's really exciting for me to be in this field right now. We're really elevating as a collective.
I love that, and I love the fact that on social media there's so many therapists who are sharing information. Just like yourself, you were doing quite a few Instagram lives, and you post on Elegant Mind, as well as on your different platforms. Now, I love talking about dating and relationships and attracting people, and I know that is beyond than just the looks. We were talking about Helen Fisher and Gary Chapman and the Gottmans. I obviously did not know this when I was in my 20s, that it is the childhood trauma and the needs that were not met when I was younger that make me find this man so attractive, that whatever needs that weren't met, to heal them, whoever is going to bring them up the most is like, that's chemistry. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I'm sure you must get a lot of single people coming into the office wanting to get better at dating, or even looking at their attachment styles. Let's dig deep into that.
Right, so I wouldn't call that chemistry, because chemistry would be what I call the neurochemistry of what makes someone so attractive to you, that you're so addicted to them, right?
Okay.
And so when you meet someone that you find attractive, and we can get into that, what attractive means to you later, it basically acts on your dopamine system in your brain to release tons of dopamine, and you're literally addicted to this person, right? You can't sleep, you're thinking about them all the time, you're texting them all the time, you might be laughing a lot more, smiling a lot more. There's definitely certain gestures that would indicate, like, oh, you like them and they like you. For women, they smile more, they laugh more, they might flick their hair, right? Yeah, stuff like that. And for men, they might kind of do like the whole broaden their shoulders and they might kind of show off their sort of more masculine prowess, right? By maybe making something for you, or like show. One of the most common ways that men with their mating behaviors is that they'll bring food. In all cultures around the world, is like they'll offer some sort of gift of tobacco, jewelry, or food. In Western culture, they take you on a dinner date, right? So there's definitely, you can see the signs of when. Pay attention the next time you're out with friends. Like, you can tell if two people are really into each other, and you can tell that these people are probably going to end up together by kind of watching their body language, right? So in this initial stage of a relationship, that's the dopamine stage of the relationship. You can call it lust, you can call it limerence, right? Dr. Dorothy Tenop, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, so she actually defined this whole initial phase of being in lust, right, or being infatuated. She called it limerence, right, where you have this one object, and that this is the one person that you really want to pursue, and you kind of have this tunnel visioned experience. That's what she called limerence. So it's a little bit more intense than just lust, which is like sexual feelings, right, or infatuation, which is which is, you know, you can be infatuated
Idolizing
with
someone.
you can be infatuated with multiple people, right? But limerence is the experience of like, this is my one and only. I must have this person, this soulmate, right? And so this,
and that's too fast early on if it's just been a couple of weeks to. What do you think?
So I mean, anthropologists, Helen Fisher namely, will say that like these days dating is very much about slowing things down. We're much more cognizant of like the fact that we are dopaminergically hooked onto someone in the first 18 months to 3 years. So especially in the first 18 months or so, you really want to evaluate this person. Are we going to be suitable for each other long term? And how do you evaluate that? So you need to look at what is our purpose for being together? What is our mission? What are our values? Are they aligned? Can we get in alignment? There might need to be some work if you really want to be with this person to get in alignment with your values, your culture as a couple, how you move through the world, what your what your sort of triggers are, and like what your deal breakers are, and how to basically have you ever read that book, The Little Prince?
I have. I love Le Petit Prince.
Le Petit Prince, exactly.
Yeah, I love
one
that.
of my favorite books as well.
Yes.
And actually, this book has a very beautiful parable, which is very applicable for ensuring that you have a happy long-term relationship. So if you remember, the fox says to the little prince that, so the little prince has a little concern, right? The little prince says, you know, how is my flower unique to me if she looks like just like all the other roses out there, right? And the fox says to the prince, well, your flower is unique to you because you tamed her. You have to tame each other. So in a relationship, you have to tame each other. And what does that mean? It means that you have to understand this person's love language. You have to understand what their inner world, what makes them tick, what do they care about. And you want to nurture that person. You want to co-regulate that person. And co-regulation is nervous system regulation, right? We can't just be like, oh, you know, you're responsible for that yourself.
It's so fascinating you bring this up. And I forget what podcast I was listening to, that these days everyone's like, well, that's your trigger. Deal with it.
Yeah.
And I love how you express that. What is our mission to be in a relationship? The co-regulation and healing that comes from being in a relationship. Do you find that in the West or just in today's culture that there's so much talk around just healing and being by yourself? And I get it. Like I've had those conversations with my own therapist, and in my moment or when my inner child is activated, I'm like, what do you want me to do? Date when I'm 80 and heal? You know? But at the same time, Marianne Williamson talks about so much healing happens in relationships because that's when our wounds come up.
Exactly.
Yes, we have to do that when we are seeing a therapist or with our friends or with our family. But the time comes that you're like, okay, I'm going to start dating, whether several people or one person, you know, exclusively, whatever that dynamic looks like. And for me, because I used to be more on the anxious side, I realized for me, it is better to get to know people as friends, to see what you were mentioning earlier. What do you want in life? What are your values, and what is your mission? What do you like to do with your time? I'm not going out partying on a Friday or a Saturday night. Like I'd rather be cooking at home or having people over. And how much of what you were saying earlier, yes, the values, yet at the same time, there needs to be some difference. What do you think? To create some spice.
There needs to be some polarity.
Some spice in there.
And this is where we can talk about energy and masculine and feminine energy and how they can complement each other. And we're just talking about energies now. We're not talking about gender expression, right? The masculine and feminine energies as a topic, if you will, comes from actually Hermetic philosophy, that there is a solar consciousness and lunar consciousness. So solar consciousness is the analytical, structural, logical way of thinking, and lunar thinking is like the creative, non-linear, intuitive way of being. And each person is responsible for balancing both, right? And whether you're male identifying or female identifying, female expressing, male expressing in your gender expression, like you have a responsibility to balance both. And when you're balanced in both of those energies, then you can attract someone and play well with someone who's also balanced, right? So if you're in one polarity, if you're a highly analytical person, it's possible that you could be attracted to someone who's like very different in that very nonlinear, creative, sort of intuitive way of being. But again, anthropologists would say, and couples therapists would say that if you're too different and you can't agree on what's important and how to be in the world, that, like, let's say you're very different in these two ways of being, but if you can't agree that, like, oh, they complement each other, then again, that relationship's probably gonna fail, right? If one person thinks that, oh, you must be analytical and like intuitive thinking is just bullshit, just, you know.
Which makes me think of a lot of the relationships I've been in, because I seriously attract the most opposite, but there's a lot of perhaps excitement or curiosity of towards the other person, and there may have been, like, you know, similarities, but I do realize ends up, I think it does eventually, for me, like whoever I'm going to attract as a long-term partner, I do think there are going to be opposite in terms of like the work, yet there will be similarities. So for example, I would date someone who is very like book smart, yet, you know, similar kind of values of staying home and cooking together and getting outdoors and hiking, and they end up being more in their feminine. In the world out there, they seem very masculine, yet in the relationship, they seem to be, which I found truly fascinating. And I noticed that me, when I'm working on this show and creating pop projects, I end up being very much in my masculine energy. Which people are like, oh, Zara, you're wearing all these dresses and your hair and everything. And I'm like, I recognize that within myself.
Your masculine energy within yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I think everybody has a responsibility to balance both of them, that in themselves. And I mean, but that's not, we can also talk about how there's brain-based differences between people with double X chromosomes and people with XY chromosomes. So if you're born with the female chromosomes, it's statistically more likely that you're going to have a more developed language areas of your brain. But if you're born with male chromosomes, then it's more likely that you're going to be more developed mathematically and spatially. So these are sort of like the natural polarities that you see between male and female sexual chromosome type people, and that may play a factor in what you find to be complementary to you. I mean, if you think of it from like a survival perspective, right? Back in evolutionary time, like we pair bonded for survival reasons. We picked a person that was going to protect you, or you were going to help each other, and so you had different roles in society. For example, you would generally have like someone who is going to be doing more gathering, and the other person was going to be doing the hunting, right? And you want to have complementary skills if you want to survive out there in the wild, right? And we were hunter-gatherers as a species for much longer than we were in this industrial age that we're in now. So we always have to remember that when we're talking about attraction and like why we're into this person versus that person and so on.
Let's talk about attachment styles.
Sure. Yeah.
So we were talking about that earlier, and you were mentioning that these days so many people are so quick to self-diagnose as that I'm this or this. Like I was mentioning earlier, I believe I was a bit more on the anxious side, and I think just over the years and through the work that I've done, I can sense that I'm more on the secure, or when I notice that I'm going into the anxious, like really taking a step back and really reviewing, is this me, or is it coming from the other person or this container of the relationship, or is this really going to match my needs? And based on that, I did, amicably, and both parties we decided because we weren't meeting each other's needs. So, and I was so proud of myself how I was in that space, and it showed me my own growth of making that decision and growing out of like a very anxious space that I used to be in, and becoming more in the middle. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I would love to hear from you, because you see people day in and day out in your work, talking about dating, relationships, long-term relationships, and how that varies.
So I'll quite often get a client in my practice who will say like, oh, I feel like, this is kind of avoidant of me, or I'm feeling more anxious. This is not like me. I think that I'm a pretty securely attached person, or like I thought I was avoidantly attached, but now I'm feeling so anxious about this person. So it's because our attachment styles are not fixed personalities. Yes, we may have like a more common expression, maybe like a more common way that we dealt with our family of origin attachment situation when we were children, when we're very small babies, but it can change a lot depending on the person that we're with. For example, let's say you're more commonly anxious, as you said, right?
Used to be,
yeah. Right. And let's say you became attracted to someone who was more anxious than you, you might find yourself expressing more of your avoidant qualities.
100%.
Yeah. Because it's a active neuropsychological system that interacts with every single person. And it starts as soon as you have decided in your mind, I'm going to rely on this person. Again, it goes back to the survival mechanism. If we go back into the psychology research, attachment was a mechanism that infants used with their parents to ensure their survival. If I'm attached to mommy or daddy, they will look after me, right? Just like the squeakiest wheel gets the grease. If I'm attached and I'm am clinging on to them, for example, then I will survive, right? But children sometimes do this thing, right? So that's anxious attachment style, clinging and trying to get attention, right? But the avoidance style is, deciding, the kid will decide, well, I'm not going to get my needs met, so I might as well just soothe myself, right? So that's the avoidance style that can be expressed. And in adulthood, that can kind of look like not being as vigilant, if you will, right? The one that kind of like is a little bit more passive, a little more removed, a little bit more just observant, and maybe a little bit detached, right? Maybe a little bit more evaluative and leaning on their logical mind rather than leading into the relationship. That would be kind of like the avoidant expression in adulthood.
And then let's talk about secure.
Secure, yeah. So secure is someone who's very comfortable with leaning in, right? Very comfortable with expressing love, being affectionate, showing their affection without fear of rejection. They are expressive with their emotions. They are vulnerable. They are capable of eliciting that from you in a very respectful manner. And they're calm, right? The biological basis of secure attachment is that they're calm. They're not concerned about you leaving them, which is the other attachment style expression.
And then there's also the anxious avoidant.
Yes, sometimes called disorganized, right? So this is the typology that has a little bit more chaos in the way that they express their attachment style. Like they might try to pull you close and pursue you and then push you away, all within the same 24-hour period or something like that.
Lovely. And I'm sure we've all displayed, any of those attachment styles. So I guess everyone probably wants to aim towards becoming more secure, regulating ourselves, while at the same time not pushing people away like the avoidant. What would you recommend to your clients, or anyone wanting to perhaps become more secure, because then you show up better when you're dating, but also in relationships. And I think it's not just in relationships, it's like with your family, how you show up at work. It's a broad stroke, like the work that we do in one area, wouldn't you say it affects every area of our life?
Yeah, so I had a good friend of mine, his name is Jacques, who said to me, you clearly have a very regulated nervous system. And he's a pretty high-level person. He's a group facilitator and a corporate event strategist. And so he's done a lot of training in Tantra, any sort of authentic relating sort of coursework. So he said to me, Angela, it's very clear to me that you have a very regulated nervous system. And that was
That's a great
really
compliment.
huge compliment, because this is something that I've worked on in all of my 20s, ever since I started going to graduate school, and then I took on my first therapist, and I found the right therapist who really helped me do the really deep work. So having come from a family where intimacy and closeness and emotional expression and caring and sweetness was not the norm, I can assure you that it's very possible to heal yourself to the extent that you have a regulated nervous system in isolation, right? And I say in isolation because that can change once you're in a relationship and your partner is doing something threatening. So what is threatening? So something that is in your perception that is kind of rocking your sense of secure attachment to that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And thank you for bringing up even the family stuff, because even for me, culturally be in our family, I was literally getting flashbacks, even though there was a lot of like, I love you and touch, and we're very warm and close that way. And even though the words would be said, we talk about everything, but there was no space for that. And it's taken me through yoga training, breath work, and even studying acting and getting more into like, how am I feeling? And then the journey of the head from the heart, and then connecting to what is going on in my body, because the body is so powerful. Like we can think that, okay, it's like this, yet the body is like, I feel something different.
Your body has an inner healing intelligence. Your body will tell you where you need to go next and what you need to address in yourself in order to heal. So the clients that I see that struggle the most are ones that don't have that connection with listening to their body. So I would say the reason I was successful in therapy so quickly was because I understood this concept very early on, and I would listen to all these little whispers from my body. So sometimes it would be like the quiver of a lip, and I would get curious about like, okay, why is my lip quivering as I'm talking about this person? And I would just sit with that and just be curious about that. And that's the inner work, right? And sometimes your stomach might have butterflies, right? Or you might notice that you're feeling kind of floaty and you're like dissociating or leaving the room, for example, right? So it's just about really listening to even like the way that you are sitting, right? I remember one time I was in group therapy and I sat like this, and I was like clutching my neck, and I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but like, I feel like I want to do this motion. And someone reflected back to me that, well, this is a self-protective motion. Like when we're feeling threatened, first thing that we do as humans is like we protect our neck, right? Our neck is a very vulnerable area. And I was like, yeah, it's because I'm feeling really vulnerable right now as I'm kind of bringing up all this stuff in front of a group.
Yeah.
Right?
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's like we can talk about so many different things. You're also a trauma therapist. You
Correct.
work a lot. Can you tell us about some of the work that you do and how you help your clients who are, whether it's like, everyone talks about, is it the big T trauma or the small T trauma?
Yeah.
And, I'm so glad that we're having these conversations now and making it normal.
Yeah.
To talk about this, to talk about just getting in here and taking care of the self, like prioritizing self-care.
Absolutely. I started out as a trauma therapist, just like Esther Perel, because you do have to resolve most of your trauma wounds before you should enter a relationship, because your relationship is going to trigger you in different ways. You should be clear in and of yourself, in your own body, and sort of get to a place where like you're regulated in isolation, and that's perhaps the ideal scenario. We don't live in a perfect world, right? The ideal scenario before you really say that I'm ready to bring someone into this world now, right? So there is some truth to like some of the pop psychology out there that you kind of have to do your own healing work too, as well, before you enter into level 2 healing within a relationship. Right? As you know, like I talked about the method and an elegant mind is like a 3-step process, and the second step is healing within a relationship. And that comes with specific skills and strategies, right? But the inner healing work, it can be a lot depending on whether it's small T or big T trauma, right? And big T trauma would be sexual abuse, catastrophic accidents, maybe catastrophic natural disasters, war, and small T traumas would be maybe a family environment where your emotional needs were not being met. But definitely in my practice, I see people where even if like the original trauma was a inept mother, that can really manifest as some really big T traumas, because maybe later in life, like this person doesn't have boundaries and know how to look for a healthy relationship, and then they end up in relationships where they're being violated sexually and physically and so on and so forth, and then that becomes a big T trauma, right? So I really think that like in order for our generations to heal, like everybody has to do the work in resolving their own psyche and their own soma
Instead
before
of
they
wanting
become
to look for, because in the age that we live in, I feel there's so much of like shopping online, this online, dating online, and looking for that external validation, whether it's through a person or through an object.
I was going to say before becoming a parent. Yeah. So, and this is tough. This is a big request for humanity, because a lot of people end up getting married young, they have kids young because they believe that that's going to produce the healthiest child, but they haven't had the time to become a fully mature adult. So for instance, in astrology, they say that when in your Saturn return, which is between age 29 to 30, that's when you truly enter into adulthood, and you really go through a shedding of the skin, and you kind of level up in your maturity and so on, right? And I would say that, like even for me, like I would say that I started very early in doing my healing work. So I started when I was 24. You also have to keep in mind that people's brains don't even fully mature until age 24. So how can you fully do all the healing work if you're still an adolescent, right? Who doesn't really have a strong grasp in the world and so on, doesn't have a lot of life experience. So the big request I'm asking of people is like, you really have to resolve your own wounds, so you're not passing on, you're not projecting your stuff onto your child, or you're not expecting your child to parent you as you have children, right?
Okay, coming back, though, that's like so much wisdom and information, and I love everything that you're sharing. Coming back to dating and relationships, what would you, for example, someone comes to you, what do you tell them what to look for when you're initially dating, in the early stages of dating someone?
Okay, so I want to talk about, I'm going to allude to something you said earlier. I can't remember the word that you used, but there is something that we call erotic templates as sex therapists. And this was a term that was originated by Jack Morin, who wrote a book called The Erotic Mind. So and he references Sigmund Freud, who was actually the first person to say that who we're attracted to is dependent on who our parents are, right? So remember he said that men will choose women that are like their mothers, and women will choose men that are like their fathers, right? It's because they were our first models for the other gender. And then we start to build on that. You know, our parents are the ones that give us affection and love and sweetness, right? Ideally, right? And then we build on that.
Ideally.
Ideally, right? Or like they kind of show us the lack of, right? And so we kind of become these sort of underdeveloped. If they don't know how to show you affection and love, then you kind of are a little bit underdeveloped, I would say, in that area emotionally. And then, you know, when you become a teenager, then you add to that sort of erotic template, if you will, by your first crushes and love interests. And then as you kind of continue to date people, you kind of continue to expand your erotic template. So over time, you can kind of add more and more things to your erotic template so that you have more of a variety of things that you're attracted to when you're choosing a partner, right? So it's important here to stay open-minded, to stay open to, you know, people of all sort of like backgrounds and like ethnicities and orientations and stuff. If you want to have a rich and satisfying relationship life where you can be attracted to a variety of people and have a lot of options, essentially, right? You don't want to be very narrow and, you know, end up choosing someone exactly like your father every single time, right? And you may draw parallels between how your current partner may be acting like your father, because human beings, we follow patterns. We often are quite predictable in our behaviors. But I think sometimes we tend too much to look for, you know, the patterns between.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, just I think people should just focus on expanding their erotic template.
100%. I completely agree with that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest, and to our audience watching, for example, in the beginning stages of dating, A, how to communicate what you're looking for, and then B, what are just some baseline things that they should be looking for in a healthy relationship when they're dating?
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is that in the sex therapy textbooks written by psychologists, they'll say that you want to give yourself 2 or 3 months to get to know someone, to gather data on a person before you say that, okay, this is someone that I want to enter into a longer term relationship with. And I've also had astrologers verify this as well, that you should give yourself some time, 2 or 3 months, to get to know someone rather than just diving into it, because we often buy into a person because of that dopamine system, because we're attracted to them, right? Because of all this chemistry, if you will, right?
I almost don't, I'm so mindful of that now, the chemistry. That's why I was bringing up chemistry earlier on in our conversation, because since reading Getting the Love We Want, or Finding
Harvey Hendricks.
Yes,
yeah.
I haven't fully read it, but like scanned through the book, and it made me made me be more aware of when my body is having a certain reaction to someone. And my body, you know, my heart is like jumping, and the butterflies and everything, and the smiles. Over the years, now, you know, all the heartbreak and everything, it's now making me be more aware. Okay, I'm sensing these feelings that are coming up. Let's see what happens. Let's give this some more time, because I don't fully trust those feelings anymore, or those sensations that are happening in the body. What are your thoughts on that?
I think in a perfect world scenario, you really have to let your dopamine system relax before you can really make a clear assessment of like, who is this person, rather than just being driven by the addiction, the love addiction to this person. So people can end up extending the dopamine reward system in a relationship for up to 3 to 5 years even, if they see their partner inconsistently. So Jack Morin also talked about this as well, that you get this increase in attraction to someone if there's some sort of barrier, if they live in a different country that's separated by oceans, if they're in some sort of social economic class or whatever that's like not allowed, or like they're like in a different some sort of taboo. It can make this person that much more addictive, and therefore extending that dopamine phase of the relationship, if you will. So you want to establish security sooner rather than later, so you can kind of see this person with sober eyes, right? Because then, again, the up and down, people can get addicted. Their dopamine systems can get triggered by the up and down as well, the inconsistency, and the danger of losing this person, and therefore you're not clearly assessing who is this person and are they suitable for me.
And I think a big thing would be like, what are my wants and needs?
Absolutely.
And becoming clear on that. Then the question is, how do I find out what are my wants and needs?
It's something you should definitely spend some time writing out in a journal, and then bring it to your therapist to help you kind of continue to expand on it, to ask you questions about it, like what are your values. I think when it comes down to making a relationship work, as long as like the principles and the values are in alignment, so they're kind of bigger picture things rather than like very specific wants and needs, because in Buddhism they say that those are just desires, and desires create suffering, right? So you're
instead of like, I want the person to cook for me,
exactly.
versus
What is the value there? Maybe it's like, because I value time efficiency. I'm a really busy person, and I'm like, and if you're a busy person, you're likely going to attract another really busy person. Then how are you two together going to make sure that you're going to be most efficient with your time, right? You got to figure out a strategy, be strategic, right? You can't just be like, I want someone who's going to cook for me every night, every day, or
Uber Eats, darling. Uber Eats.
Or fresh prep, get it delivered, right? Maybe you're taking turns, right? How are you going to make this work for both of you? How are you going to create a win-win situation for both of you? And remember that not everybody wants the same thing. So what's a win for you may not be a win for me, right? If, you know, just because you care about time efficiency, maybe you chose a partner who doesn't care about that, and therefore you have this really good match where like they're happy to serve you, they're happy to be of service to you, and you're happy to receive their service, right? You have to, you know, a lot of women or a lot of people will say like that they don't, like, some people want someone who's are very content to have someone who's going to be of service so that they can sort of excel in life, right? But sometimes women have this double standard where they want someone to be mindful of their sort of needs as like a female entrepreneur, right? A self-starter, but then also want that person to serve their needs and be chivalrous and all this stuff. But that's a double standard, right? So you have to, a secure attached relationship is a fair relationship. So you have to figure out and iron out that double standard. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it completely makes sense. So for example, you get a client coming to you and they're like, okay, we've been working together for a while, I'm ready to like get out there. How would you suggest to me that, you know, what are the kind of questions I'm asking on the first couple of dates?
That's a really good question. I don't really have any general advice for that.
I know everyone's needs are going to be different, but for example, that individual is wanting a long-term partnership, or
I mean, if you want
just to evaluate that this individual is even emotionally available, which takes time, because someone can think that anyone can think, okay, I'm emotionally available, but once you jump into something and then you're like, oh, actually, I'm not really there.
Well, I think my general advice would be ask open-ended questions. And I think one of the best questions, if you want to get into the meat and potatoes of it and just fast track this, is ask them, what is your mission in life? Then you get a sense of like, do they have that level of maturity to even think that way? do they have a mission? Because lots of people have not figured out what that is, and that kind of shows you where they're at, right? And if you're comfortable with that and you're both figuring out your mission together, that's fine. Then you can kind of adjust to each other, right? You're co-regulating and adjusting as you go, and maybe there could be more room to play with there, right? But if you have a clear mission and the other person has a clear mission, then that's the clarity that you have in terms of, can we move to get forward as a couple? Right. And then maybe the other question is like, what is your purpose when you're looking for a partnership? Like, why do you want a partnership?
Or why are you dating? What is your desire for that? Like, is it, just something to fill the time, or everyone has different objectives. And sometimes I find to become super clear when I ask these very clear questions, the other person becomes a little bit frustrated.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I just want to go with the flow. I don't know what I want. Well, I can respect that, and you just want to be in the foggy area.
Right. Well, that tells you where that person is. Like they do not have a clear direction. Yeah. So that person can be in that fogginess for who knows how long, right? But that's your data. That's your information to go off of.
So you work also with couples and singles, helping them go deeper in their relationship to themselves, as well as
correct
relating with their partner. Tell us about some of that work that you do.
Correct. Intimacy is hard. Intimacy is showing the person your inner world, your inner thoughts and feelings. And it's a muscle that we have to practice. A lot of people, depending on their household that they grew up with, they might feel that telling someone their inner world is kind of like showing this person all your cards, and then they can use it against you, right? So people who grew up in those sort of households might struggle with letting someone in that way, right? And they're going to really have to work on it, really kind of try to do the opposite of just being transparent, of just being immediate with their thoughts and feelings, being authentic, if you will. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, completely. Can I ask, do you use some sort of practices or exercises when you're working with a couple one-on-one in a room?
Yeah, so I'm Tantra trained. In order to be an American sex therapy certified, just like Esther Perel is, she's ASECT certified, you do have to go through some level of Tantra training. And in Tantra, a lot of people don't realize they're doing Tantra, but eye gazing is a tantric practice. So you would pick left eye to left eye, for example, and you would just gaze. Yeah, you would sit hip to hip, right? Yeah. Shoulder to shoulder, all your chakra centers lining up, and you would just eye gaze for a bit and just notice what's coming up. And even this simple practice for some couples is completely foreign to them and brings up a lot of jitteriness, and that's something to be curious about, like what's going on over there.
You know what's so fascinating in my last relationship, and the person I was with, there was love there and everything, they would tear up so much when we would just do that and just breathing together. Because I think just so used to running and being busy.
Correct.
But when someone is just there looking at you and breathing, and then I would want to talk about it, like, do you mind going into, and they don't want to acknowledge what's happening. I mean, yet at the same time, I found it very beautiful that you're able to feel open enough that you're giving your body and your heart permission to have an emotional release. Because to me, there's nothing more beautiful that the mask comes down. We're breathing together, looking at each other, and you're allowing yourself to cry and to have this release. But them being a man, and I think the idea of what it means to be a man, they did not want to talk about what exactly those feelings were.
So this is where men need to do men's work, because men need male role models, people that look like them, someone that they look up to, like, oh, he kind of look like me and act like me and stuff, to model to them what it's like to have emotions as a man. And I think as a female therapist, I can't really do that for men, but I can definitely coach people, couples in my practice, to stay with the feelings that are coming up as they're kind of sitting in this more intimate fashion, if you will. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And as you know, I really am so much more curious about the work that you do. And what would you say is your mission in life?
My mission, my mission is very much aligned with my business. I told one of my good friends, Mia Costco, that your business is an expression of your soul, and I believe that. So my mission is to help people resolve their inner wounds so that they can show up in full authenticity of who they are, become fully embodied in who they are, and be comfortable with that, and so that they can be truly intimate with another person. And I've walked that path, so I can assure you that it's possible to get to this place where you can experience this juicy intimacy with another human being without shutting down, without fears coming up. And this is a process. I mean, we all have to do this together. Like, if I'm the only one doing this work, just like the couples that come into my practice, if only one of you is willing to do the heavy lifting, but the other person is like, no, won't change, can't change like that, then that relationship's going to end.
Yeah. Or you're going to stay in something that's stagnant. I was having a conversation with an acquaintance friend, and they were saying that how their partner, they were in a long-term relationship, and their partner does not want to look at anything that he is in his past, and there's a lot of trauma there. And she's the one who's going to all these workshops and group therapy and 12-step programs and all this work. I don't think I could be in something like that. I've done that in the past, that I've been in relationships where I'm the only person doing the work and reviewing and digging deep. Yet as I've, evolved in my healing, on my healing journey, I realized that is, we have to both work on something together.
Correct. Yeah. I just hope that people are willing to stay curious enough about their own psychology, about what's coming up in their bodies enough so they can continue to transcend and heal and level up.
What does it mean to be fully embodied?
To be fully embodied, it means to be an acknowledgement of all the little sensations that might be coming up in conversation with someone as you sit in meditation, and to be curious about, what is my body telling me? What is this saying? Is there something that's not healed here? Is there something I need to investigate in my life? Is there a conversation I need to have with someone? Is there some sort of unresolved relational issue that I need to fix or address?
That sounds so meditative. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's level 1 of like acknowledging the body. Level 2, I've had some folks come into my practice saying that they can't do talk therapy, that they need to move through some of the things that they've experienced and felt, right? And then it's also learning how movement can be an emotional release. So I have a dance teacher. His name is Venom. He's a local Jamaican dance hall instructor from Jamaica. I
want to come dance with you.
He's the only one. Yeah, so we can actually do classes together.
I would love that.
And he is actually a very model male for how a man can hold a lot of beautiful feminine energy and yet still have his masculine energy as well. His masculine presentation is still identify as a masculine and so on, right? But he really taught me that how to express feelings through movement, through dance, right? And what is dance? Dance is not just movement, because I can just move and that's just movement, right? But dance is allowing music to move you, to allow life to move you. Yeah.
And you can also, like, there's times, like actually this morning when I woke up, I was tired, yet at the same time I was so excited because it's our second last day, and I was so excited for all the guests that are coming today, all the conversations I'm gonna have, and I do feel truly honored to like have all these individuals, including yourself, coming and sitting here and opening up and digging deep and talking about things that inspire you. And I just started dancing. I hadn't even like talked or said anything to Loki. One of my cousins, she is an astrologer, and she's actually on her way to Egypt right now because she'll be teaching a workshop there. And she did this like annual sort of astrology forecast for me like last year, and kind of telling me things like try this and this. And she's like, move, whether you listen to music or not, allow your body, like close your eyes and feel. Because I think culturally also, like in yoga, we talk about this, you know, chakras, as we were mentioning earlier, the amount that we can hold like in our belly and in our hips and like breathing in there. So as an actor, when we would do voice work and breath work, and when I would breathe into those areas and really stay in like a pigeon pose and then do a scene, like how much I can emotionally open versus when I don't. And how much more connected I became to my body through yoga and through acting classes, because I realized like before, even now, sometimes as we're digging into some deep topics, I could feel, I was like, whoa, I'm holding my breath. Breathe. Like breathe. Like why am I holding my breath? Breathing. And but those things I didn't learn growing up, you know, or were talked about much like in the 80s in Pakistan, you know, and then add to that like being a female and all those things, and like truly expressing how you're feeling and what's going on for you. Because there's the cultural nuances to, you know, when you're going to see your therapist. Like I talk about that a lot with my therapist, who is Mexican and she wasn't born here. And then she talks about that it's a trauma even moving to a new country. Whether you were escaping a war-torn country or not. It's such a big trauma for your nervous system. Like people who are born here, they don't understand, whether you're Caucasian or not, that I came here at 17. So not having any roots, new language, and even though I spoke English, yet at the same time, I wanted to acclimatize and be like everyone else as soon as possible, and not giving yourself permission to be like, it takes time.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're losing connection to family members, you're losing connection to your culture, you're having to figure out the logistics of a new country, a new language, and that is a loss, right? And loss is trauma. When you lose something before you're ready to let go of it, that's trauma.
In terms of your clients, can you tell me what type of clients you primarily work with?
I don't know if I have a primarily.
But who are attracted and drawn to you?
Well, I see anywhere from age 14 onwards, so I don't see very young children. I'm not a child therapist, but emerging adults, I would say the average age is age 30. So I see anywhere between 25 to 45 is like sort of my age range. I see couples, I see folks in polyamory formations, polycules, if you will, all gay, lesbian, bi, also non-binary, trans folks. What else? Like, obviously, me being Chinese, I attract a lot of Asian and Chinese people that are looking to resolve some more cultural nuances around growing up in a Chinese household, particularly when you grow up in a Canadian context. Like, it feels a little bit jarring because you're in a particular culture in your home, but then your school and like the outside world functions a little bit differently. Yeah. So that was my story, and I think a lot of Chinese people are attracted to me. I bring those kind of folks into my practice, like folks that grew up in a very Chinese home with Chinese immigrant parents, but grew up in this Western context. Yeah.
Our show is called The Inspired Life Vancouver. I love asking everyone who sits where you're sitting, what inspires you in life?
Wow. I haven't been asked like that before. I think what inspires me in life is the mysteries of what we don't quite know yet in terms of how love works. In very, very rare cases, I would say, you do see couples where it just works. They just don't get angry. They don't hold grudges, and they have managed to just be so sweet and loving towards each other. I would say that's definitely a minority. It's probably 18% or less of all couples, but they are out there. So I as like a data-oriented person, I'm always kind of trying to create patterns, looking at data and trying to make patterns and like how to make sense of the world. I'm definitely looking at what are the factors involved in making those relationships work. Yeah, and I don't think we've uncovered it all yet.
Well, you heard it here. I'm sure that we can talk for many, many more hours and go much more deeper. But thank you for coming today. I know you have a very busy practice, and it was so lovely having you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
They give each other the best hugs. You give the best hugs, Angela.
Well, if you folks are feeling inspired, make sure to get in touch. And thank you, Angela, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Until next time.
Oh, darling.
That was fun.
I know.